It can be really difficult to grind your way out of the lower ranks. When you don't already have the experience and your teammates are also stuck the same way you are, not even a lucky streak of games will help you move your way up. So for this video, we'll go into the best ways to focus on what you can do to win your games, and how to stay sane while doing so. If you're looking to rank up on your favorite heroes, check out the link in the description below to get access to a GameLeap membership. There are tons of guides and courses that can level up your game and help you get better, faster. Make sure to check it out and enjoy the video. Before we get into the best mentality to have, first up is the easy answer to escape ELO hell: abusing busted, overpowered meta heroes. Different seasons and different compositions make for all types of broken abilities to take advantage of. Even though the pro meta doesn't come close to being the same in lower ranks, you can still do a lot with the heroes that are too strong even for the best players. For example, now in Season 11, heroes like Pharah, Illari, and Sigma are strong. Spam heroes that win duels at range. The first step to getting value out of the top meta heroes is understanding why they're good, and you can figure it out yourself if you focus on what strengths the heroes actually have. All three of those heroes have long range and burst damage, and a way to survive after being pressured. If you set yourself up at an angle where you can hit your shots and deal a ton of damage without being contested, the fight will just automatically win when you rack up enough hits. The only job you have to do is stay in position to do so. If the enemy team rotates, you want to keep an angle on them. If they focus you, look to fall back with your grasp or outburst or jet dash so you don't die and can keep staying in position to shoot them. The most important thing that top players have over lower ranks is experience, not necessarily mechanics. Experience tells you what abilities are strong and why, and help you use them. So when you can't look up the answer to your exact situation, like Sigma Cassidy Baptiste into Winston Tracer Lucio, you can get a good idea of how it works when you focus on what makes the heroes good in the first place. That's it for abusing top heroes in the game, so let's get started with the right mentality. You might have heard of this before. In the matchmaking system, 1/3 of your games are heavily favored for you to win, another third are instead favored for you to lose, and the final third are the games where you can make the difference. It can easily seem like you're constantly being favored to lose game after game, and although you can have an unlucky loss streak, keep in mind that our brains literally remember bad games more than good games, especially in lower ranks when the good games are just barely decent while the bad games are a total mess. Now, knowing that doesn't make the bad games necessarily more tolerable, but it helps a lot when you accept that some games are just guaranteed losses. Even with astronomical effort, you'll just make it close. But the lesson isn't that you shouldn't try, it's that some games are just about practicing more than winning. Focusing on that means you'll still improve and drill in good habits even when you won't get any SR for it. So next, let's get into the good habits you want to focus on and the bad habits you want to avoid. You can't control what your team does, so even if you can't carry your team to victory, you can make sure that you're not dragging them down or losing fights on your own. Let's get into the in-game interactions. A good habit is keeping track of the ultimate advantage of each team. The game has come a long way, but ultimates are still overwhelmingly strong, so knowing which team will win in an all-out ultimate trade, or which team has the more impactful ultimates, will help you understand which fights you can win easily and which ones are better to just kite away from as soon as the ultimates start being traded. A great example is Kiriko's Kitsune Rush. As a tank, you can lose the fight for your team by committing your abilities and then being blown away by the entire enemy team speeding at you with reduced cooldowns and increased fire rate. If you know that there's nothing you can do to match that from your own team, you can actively look to bait the engage and just wait it out. And it has the bonus effect of tilting the enemy team by just wasting their best resources. Another example is as a DPS, you can keep track of when the enemy team has an answer for your ultimate and when they don't. Basic ult tracking is easy to do, especially in the first fights of the game when you can see exactly how much damage and healing has been done by each player so far. After that, it's as simple as remembering what ultimates were used 1 or 2 fights ago, so you know what to expect next. Another good habit is respecting your ability cooldowns. What you should try to play for are your strong and weak phases in the fight. It's actually most important for DPS compared to tanks. For Tracer or Genji, it can feel like you have to get kills to carry all the time, but playing like that is an easy way to get 10 deaths per 10. When you don't have recall or deflect, you're simply not as threatening anymore. And if you're only playing aggressive when you're at your strongest, you'll be much harder to kill. In all ranks, you need to prioritize living for all roles. And taking risks for kills should always be when you have your safeguard abilities to bail you out after going for a play. And for a final good habit to practice, take the time to look at your team's position often throughout the game. It works differently for all roles. Tanks need to look behind themselves since they're mostly facing forward. Supports benefit from checking their DPS positions to know which flanks are uncontested, and DPS have a healthy mix of both, checking what their team is doing so they're not left out to dry when fighting flanks or fighting frontline. In low ranks, you're more likely to find your teammates in awful positioning, but although you can't stop them from playing there, you can play around it so you don't make a mistake based off of your teammates' suboptimal play. Next, let's go over bad habits to avoid. That 1/3 of your games where you can make an impact, isn't just about diffing the enemies and outplaying them, it's also about not dropping the ball and losing unnecessary fights for your team. The first bad habit to avoid is focusing too much on your team's performance. Overwatch is a team game, so everything you do affects and is affected by your team. But the only way to keep your own performance consistent is by staying focused on your own game. It's definitely going to get frustrating at times, like when people are dying before the fight starts, so you pretty much have no chance. But the best thing to do is always to just do what you can in-game. Way too many players have actual anger issues, so even asking them nicely to play safely doesn't always work. And that goes on to the next bad habit to break: flaming your team when things go wrong. Some games are lost no matter what, but you're almost guaranteed to ruin any semblance of a good lobby when your teammates start getting annoyed at each other. And flaming takes a lot of different forms. If you're going to communicate, keep it simple and without judgment. Even just expressing disappointment at a wasted ultimate can tilt someone. It's just how it is. So do your best not to trigger anyone. Even if your teammates are the most awful players you've ever seen, they're almost definitely going to play worse if they feel worse. But enough about your teammates' feelings. Getting out of low ranks doesn't just happen because you avoid flaming. You still have to play for your role. Tanks are all about taking space and trading resources effectively against the enemy team. That means you want to take map control for your team so you can surround the enemy and use your tank abilities to force out enemies and their cooldowns. For DPS, you're either dealing damage to the front line or enabling your other DPS to deal damage to front line by fighting in the flanks and keeping enemies from surrounding you. And supports are pretty much enabling everybody, but for a more specific purpose. What we know as flex supports like Ana, Baptiste, and Kiriko enable the tank and main damage source, while main supports are pretty much enabling everyone as usual. Playing for your role is easier said than done. Notice that tanks and DPS aren't playing to rush and kill. Even if lower ranked teams allow you to triple blink in for kills or stay alive without your defensive abilities, you'll get the same fight win result with less risk by just setting up for the team. Support is a more straightforward role, but there are plenty of times when they can also lose the plot by focusing too little on enabling and too much on making personal clutches. Even if you're the only member on your team playing correctly, that's one more player being consistently effective than if you didn't. Playing for your team is always valuable even if the team is bad. But you also have to play for yourself when your team just can't cut it. Besides having the right mental, getting better habits, respecting your limits on your hero, and playing for your role within the team correctly, you also have to clutch up when you can. When you're on tank, you can carry by understanding the matchup between the other tank and backline better. If you can constantly force the other tank out, focusing on just that for the whole game will give your team the best chance to win. And if the enemy backline dies to a simple dive, you can ignore everyone else and focus on marking 2 or more players all the time. For DPS, you can just focus on winning your duels. If you're good enough with your positioning and aim, you're always going to have the upper hand. And that means you can move on to the next duel or focus down the tank from your newfound position. Constantly dispatching of enemies is pretty much the best you can do as a DPS. Just make sure that you don't get ahead of yourself and take on a 1v2 too quickly. Playing for yourself as a support is the hardest one. Your role is dedicated to sustaining and enabling others. And factually, there are just some supports that cannot make plays on their own, or just don't have a strong enough impact when they do. But you can still clutch up by fighting off the flankers trying to kill you, by hitting your abilities and positioning safely so they have to either push through your line of sight or fight through your teammates to get to you. And for the final tip, when it comes to communication, you don't want to just avoid flaming, you also want to keep things simple. Not everyone has or wants to use their mic, but it helps a lot when you can communicate a direction to your team. If the enemy team uses their ultimate too early, you want to kite. Not everyone is going to know that in low elo or even see the situation in the same way, but not calming that means you risk the chance of someone dying because they don't know what their team wants to do. And likewise, if there's a flanker on your supports stopping them from healing the front line, giving that information can make your tank play slower. Keeping it simple makes the communication more effective, even if you're not guaranteed to be listened to. Either way, you're going to have to deal with bad teammates if you're in a low elo, but you can at the very least get out of it slowly but surely if you follow these tips. That's it for how to escape elo hell. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.